Alright, good evening, and this is Mr. Rai, and we are going to start this evening's lesson from the dress rehearsal of the musical Anything Goes. So that lovely music in the background you hear is the smooth stylings of Mr. Ryan Erickson. Alright, so we're starting today with the Gospel of Wealth. So in your notes, you want to section this part off here, Gospel of Wealth, and this should be a subheading in your notes. And this was advocated by Andrew Carnegie, and this was a concept that wealthy should give back their fortunes to society for improvement. Carnegie establishes Carnegie Mellon University, Carnegie Hall in New York, and gives millions to cure hookworm disease and establish public libraries. So again, we should have this subtitle here and these 4 bullets. Alright. Another section here, the robber barons. So this should again be a subtitle in our notes. This was a negative term used to describe the industrious as being corrupt and using unethical business practices to establish monopolies. So we want to section that off. They would eliminate competition. They would take advantage of cheap immigrant labor, and they kept wages low, working hours long, and kept their environments unsafe. So let's take a look at this cartoon here. What do we see on this gentleman's sash here? We see the word trust. And on this gentleman's here, same thing, we see the word trust. Here we see war, tariff, and monopoly. Excuse me. In the background we see our factories. Alright, let's take a look here. On his sword, this says legislation. So that's what they use as their sword. And they use that against these people here. And who do we think these people might be? What do they look like? Well, they look like, again, possibly the poor, working class, middle class folks. And these bags, that they are giving, say tax on them. Tax and tax. So the average working class are giving their taxes to these monopoly companies, these robber barons. And again, these robber barons are the same people that we would consider our captains of industry. And we can see that essentially by the caption down here. History repeats itself. The robber barons of the Middle Ages and the robber barons of today. And that's shown by these robber barons up in this section here. And this is feudalism being practiced in Europe. These were the similar robber barons of their own day. Alright, so again we want to have robber barons as our subtitle, and a negative term used to describe industrialists as being corrupt and using unethical business practices to establish monopolies. Again, here we have their trusts, and again, these are guys like Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, so on and so forth. And we see that here by monopoly, tariff, and war. And here they're donating these taxes, or not really donating, giving up this tax money to these robber barons because the robber barons have legislation on their side. Alright, let's take a look at the next slide. Alright, so again, similarly here, these protectors of our industries. So, who are the people down here, might we say? What do they look like? These might be the average workers. And again, we have raw materials here and finished goods such as cloth, which is a raw material, but linens is a finished good. You have items like lumber. I apologize for that one. Here it says paper. And here again you have, fields, millions, Anderson's millions, and Gould's millions. And on their stomachs we have the symbol for money, the dollar sign, on their stomachs. And so their stomachs really represent those bags of money. And we can see here, again, as these people are standing in the water, they're standing in hard times. Now here's something to here off in the distance. We see hard times here as well. And notice this here, the hammer and sickle. What do the hammer and sickle represent? Let's take a second to think about that. What do the hammer and sickle represent? And notice how they're next to hard times with the average workers down here supporting these guys with their bags of money as they sit atop this piece. Okay, so hammer and sickle, what does that represent? Think about that for a second. I'll be right back. Alright, so the hammer and sickle again represents communism. Okay, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that communist state in Russia. Good. Alright, moving on to the next slide here. Alright, let's take a look here. So this is entitled The Bosses of the Senate. So, see how it says here, entrance for monopolists. And here we have the Steel Beam Trust, the Common Trust, The Standard Oil Trust. The Coal Trust. The Sugar Trust. The Iron Trust. And again, our cartoon is titled The Bosses of the Senate. Alright, so here we see again, the bosses of the Senate for monopolies. So they have this giant entrance of these monopolies and these trusts coming in to have a giant opening for the monopolists. And at left of you here is Aaron Carson wearing a mop as a mustache and a beard. Alright, so moving on here. Over on this side of the Senate, we see this door here. It says closed, and notice how it's locked. Okay, here. This says up here, and you can't really read it so well, the People's Entrance. Alright, so the Senate here, these are our senators. Okay, these are our senators here. And they are being overshadowed by those trusts. Okay? And they have a huge entrance to come in versus the people that have a very small entrance to come in. And their entrance is even closed. Alright, good job. Alright, here we go. J.P. Morgan. So, we already started to watch our clips on J.P. Morgan, and we're going to bebop around to take a look at some clips. But one of his most famous quotes is, "If you have to ask how much it costs, you can't afford it." Alright, let's take a look at Pierpont. Pictured here is President Theodore Roosevelt. And Roosevelt would use the Sherman Antitrust Act, and this should definitely go into our notes. Okay, the Sherman Antitrust Act. Which was used by Theodore Roosevelt. This was passed in 1890, and it declared illegal all combinations in restraint of trade. For the first 12 years of its existence, the Sherman Act was a paper tiger. Essentially what that means is it was a law that really wasn't used that often. And when it was, the United States courts would side with businesses over enforcing the act itself. So more often than not, the Sherman Antitrust Act was sided with business instead of sided with the government. So again, we want to have the Sherman Antitrust Act down, and I would take down essentially till here. And this should go in our notes. Alright, on to the next slide. So Roosevelt knew that no new legislation was necessary for him to take on some of these monopolies. And when he sensed that he had a sympathetic Supreme Court, then he sprung into action. So President Roosevelt, again here, was not the type to initiate major changes timidly, which means unfearful. So, the first trust giant to fall to Roosevelt's assaults was none other than the most powerful industrialist in the country, J. Pierpont Morgan, J.P. Morgan. And Roosevelt challenged Morgan's monopoly of the railroad under the Sherman Antitrust Act and won. Barely, but won. So in our political cartoon here, we have clearly Roosevelt wrestling. Okay, so clearly Roosevelt here, like we just said, clearly wrestling the rail industry. At this point, I would advise you to stop, go to this link here, which is also linked on my weekly plans page, and it's linked as, and I'll put this here for you. Oh, I apologize. I'm gonna try that again. So it is. I apologize again. Try this one more time here. I apologize for that as well. Alright, let's try this now. Here we go. So on my website, it's linked as Alright, so it's linked on my website as President Roosevelt versus J.P. Morgan. So again, we can either copy this link and watch this. I believe it's a 3-minute and 15-second video on Roosevelt versus J.P. Morgan. Or we can go to my website and find the link on the weekly plans at the very bottom of the page and watch it from there. But I would stop this video and watch this one now. Alright? So take that 3 minutes and go ahead and watch that clip. And I'm going to transition to the next slide for us, so when you come back. Alright? Alright, welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed that clip on President Roosevelt versus J.P. Morgan. Again, short, quick, to the point, and just shows how Roosevelt was not afraid to take on Morgan, who believed he was the most powerful man in the country, more powerful than the president. So, here we go. So we have someone here, okay, clearly tied to this stake here, and the stake says Monopoly. And the chain that holds him to this stake says Workman. And notice again all of these folks breathing fire at him. You see this one here, it says Monopoly Press. This one here says Depew, another monopolist. Okay. If you look closely again at some of these faces, okay, some of them may look familiar, okay, as some of our monopolists, such as this figure here, which this figure here and this figure here both kind of represent and look very similar to Cornelius Vanderbilt as he was young and old. All right, and this figure is supposed to look like, you know, Joan of Arc, or almost like a deity being tortured on the stake of Monopoly. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. Alright, so the child labor exporter. Okay. Again, just another cartoon, and we're going to talk a lot more about child labor in depth as we move into our section on unions here in a little bit. But as you can see, a giant figure here, Roman or Greek figure, riding in the chariot here. He's got a cat and nine tails in his hand, or whip here. And we also have, again, that title, Child Exploitator. And here are obviously those kids. They're being forced to do the work, and they are shackled, as seen here, to money. Alright, so again, take a look at this one real quick. Okay. And like I said, we're going to talk a lot more about child labor too, so this is just a good brief intro to it. Alright, let's see if our next slide continues on here. Alright, so that's our next section, is labor unions emerging, and we'll probably break that up into a couple of videos. So again, I hope that we got all of these notes down on the Gospel of Wealth and how important the Gospel of Wealth was, as well as taking a look at these different political cartoons and achieving those necessary notes. Alright, so this is Mr. Wright. I'm signing off for the evening. Hope you all have a lovely day. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. Don't forget as well to make sure that you check my website. Again, you Google Mr. Roddy. I'm the first hit. And then on the left-hand side of my website, you can click on the AS Weekly Plans, American Studies Weekly Plans. And I have the links to these videos there. And I've also updated some of the links to the men who built America for you. So today I updated one on John D. Rockefeller as well for part 2. And tomorrow I'm going to put up part 3 and part 4 for y'all as well. All right. Well, again, I hope you all have a great night. And from the dress rehearsal of Anything Goes, this is Mr. I signing off. Have a great night.